This was the Belgrave Flyover in Leicester. Until the beginning of 2014, it took the motorist north out of town, up and over a roundabout, and down onto the Belgrave Road, or the Golden Mile. If you were travelling in the opposite direction, it took you from the Golden Mile onto the Central Ring Road or straight on towards the city centre. The flyover was completed in 1974 and lasted 40 years until its demolition to try and create a more pleasant route from the centre of Leicester to the shops on the Belgrave Road. There had been concern about traffic in Leicester as far back as the 1920s, and plans drawn up in the 1950s and 1960s featured ring roads, elevated motorways with interchanges and multi-storey car parks to keep cars out of the centre of the city. While this didn't happen on anything like the scale it might have, on the west and south of the city the Central Ring Road was directed into underpasses, while to the east Leicester got its only two flyovers, this one and the nearby Belgrave Flyover. In the early 1970s there were also plans to create a huge elevated road running over the top of the Highfields area, the Eastern Relief Road, but fortunately for Highfields this didn't happen. So, the Belgrave Flyover gave us a glimpse of what might have happened, and is the closest Leicester got to the idea of a motopia, cities of elevated roads with everyone living underneath, which is to say, not very close. As well as being a working flyover, for 40 years this had also been a local landmark. It was a sign that you were either about to leave or enter the city centre. It also gave you a great view of the Belgrave Road, especially when the lights are up for Diwali, Christmas and the New Year. And it was also an object of pleasure. For some. Feel free to disagree, but although the surface was fairly shabby when you drove over it, if you stood back this was quite an elegant piece of engineering. Not as picturesque as the neighbouring Belgrave Flyover, which manages a pleasing curve, but it had a nice line across the roundabout and just enough deviation from the straight to create an interesting view. And yes, those were fountains on either side of it. Largely forgotten by the time of its demolition, children splashed around in these when it was first built. Another feature of flyovers is the space underneath them. This space is off the maps. You see the line of the road on the map, but nothing tells you what is underneath or what might be happening there. These spaces are often where people practice their graffiti, ride skateboards, leap from railing to railing, or just hang out. However, on a cold, dark winter's afternoon, a week or so before the demolition was due to start, there wasn't anything happening here, and the only things using the space under the flyover were pigeons and a few pedestrians. It didn't help that traffic drove under the middle of the flyover. There was also a variety of brick and concrete shapes that added some great texture and visual interest, but meant that the area under the flyover was very limited in what could be done with it. You would have had trouble skateboarding on this. It was difficult enough to walk on it, although people often did. Like most places where there are defined routes laid out, we often want to find our own way, but here it was at the risk of a twisted ankle. There weren't even any fake trees or lotus blossoms like the Belgrave Flyover has on the roundabout beneath it. Indeed, when the Cultural Mapping Scheme commissioned artworks for the roads around the centre at the start of the 2000s, the Belgrave Flyover didn't get anything. This is just concrete, in all its various textures, and people didn't tend to stop. They kept moving on their way to and from school, college, home, work and the nearby Sainsbury's. I liked it here, but I didn't have to walk through it every day. Now the flyover has come down, the route for pedestrians is probably more pleasant, but it's not as interesting. So, farewell then, the Belgrave Flyover, a local landmark, a relic of one planning era that is now the victim of another that has different ideas about what works and what doesn't. One example of what might have been. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Well, it wasn't exactly the pyramids, was it? And now it's gone. However, it does raise the question of how we should think about the nearby Burley's flyover. This is now the only flyover in the city centre. It's nicely designed and landscaped, and in years to come it could be a monument to a moment in history when car culture shaped the way we designed and built our cities. Should we ever knock this down?